Okay, so I've been asked a couple times to go over squares, reference tools, basically things that help you to do your job better and to make sure that what you're doing is consistent and is on the mark. So there are a ton of squares out there. Squares from, expensive ones like this combination square, to cheap ones like this. They look similar. They're not the same. I'm going to go over that a little bit and my approach to dealing with squares. So let me take it back just a little bit. Where I started with squares was buying something like this. You have a straight edge right here, and you have this over here, and then you have a 45 on there. This is a speed square. I learned very quickly in cabinetry that something was not quite right. I'd use something like this, I put it up against the side of my cabinet, and it was reading square, but then when I was putting all my drawer fronts on, the whole thing was level, the whole thing was square, but my drawer fronts weren't lining up, and I didn't know why, and it was because my square was off. That is the outworking of a bad reference tool. Basically, you know that something is level, you know that something is straight, but it's not lining up, and that's because of the reference tools you're using. So my approach to all of it, number one, I don't use tools like this big framing square on cabinetry, because these things are made with a tolerance, and usually the tolerances in framing are a lot larger than cabinetry. So I don't use those. I'll use something like this for marking. So if I'm putting something down and I want to mark, 12 inches out, and I'll just make a mark or something like that. I use that for layout, but I won't use it to check to see if something's square. So we get something like that. Speed squares are almost always a little bit out. They're inconsistent at best from one to another. So even if I put these together like this, yeah, they're not right on. So I've found that things that are made of aluminum just don't last. Okay, so get that out of here. My approach to squares is basically buy one really good square. This is a Starrett Machinist square number 3020. This is a very high precision square, and it cost me a lot of money. And I use this to check everything else. So this square right here is similar. It's a Machinist square, but this was cheap. This came in a pack of three different sizes, and I didn't want to rely on these at first until I checked them with this Starrett Machinist square, and they're all square. I think this one here is a little bit out. What I use these for is setting tooling, making sure that, say, like my table saw blade is perfectly square at the bed, or checking miter saws or whatever else. That's what I use those for. But what I do is I bought a really good square, I checked it, made sure it was perfectly square, and then I use this as a reference to everything else that I have. I thought I did that with this square. This is a Starrett combination square, 12-inch rule. It has this combination head on it. It has a circle center head for it, and it also comes with a protractor head. The first time I got this square, I was noticing inconsistencies. And the problem was this head right here wasn't square. I took it back to the store. They asked me, why does a cabinet maker need to have that much, or a woodworker need to have that much precision? And I told him, it's like, well, do you like your gaps on your cabinetry to be nice and straight and to be consistent? That's why. Because even though we're not dealing with the most precise materials, we're dealing with sight lines and gaps and reveals that need to be straight and they need to look good. So that's what I'm using these squares for. So I have a 12-inch combination square from Starrett. I have a 4-inch combination square from Starrett. Basically, this one stays in the box all the time, and I only bring it out to double check. That one's still dead on. This is a Chinois square that I bought off Amazon for 30 bucks. It's dead on. This is the one I used in the Makita saw. These are a couple Starrett squares that they're not that great. They were cheap. They came off Amazon, number 53-8. I use these just for layout. So when I go to check this thing, I notice that it's off. It's off by probably a 32nd at the end of this right here, which is not great. I would not rely on that for checking things for square, but it's good for doing things for layout. Actually, this one's not bad. That's pretty close. Anyway, my rule of thumb is buy one really good square and use it to verify cheap squares and to keep checking them as time goes on. So I'll use these. I won't use this. This stays in the box. Put this up on the shelf. It's not going to get banged around, and I rely on these squares to do all the work because I'm going to be dropping these. I'm going to be, putting them in my pouch, banging around. Who knows what's going to happen to them. This one I can use as a reliable reference to make sure everything else stays the way it's supposed to be. Double check them from time to time, but I can also go with less expensive tooling for most of my stuff and just verify with an expensive tool like this. That's my approach, and I think it's a fairly reasonable one, especially from a cabinet maker's standpoint.